Get these kids away from me! The white woman's voice ripped through first class, her outrage louder than the jet engines. Two 8-year-old black twins froze clutching their coloring books as passengers turned to stare. The flight attendant hesitated, caught between policy and prejudice. Tears welled in the girl's eyes, but in that same moment, the cockpit door clicked open. The pilot had heard everything. What the woman didn't know was that her tantrum was about to become a lesson in justice witnessed by the entire world. Because on this flight, the captain didn't just fly the plane, he grounded hate at 30,000 feet. Welcome back to Black and Bruised Stories. If you're new here, you've just joined a community dedicated to truth, justice, and survival. Show some love by clicking the like and subscribe button. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Eleanor Briggs, 58 years old, stood in the aisle of first class like a monument to entitlement, her designer handbag clutched against her chest as if the two small children in seats 4A and 4B might somehow contaminate it with their presence. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. Her hair perfectly coiffed, weekly salon appointments. Her face contorted with a disgust so visceral that several passengers initially thought she must have discovered something genuinely alarming. A snake, perhaps, or some other danger that would justify such a dramatic reaction. But there was no snake, no danger, no justifiable reason for Eleanor Briggs to be standing there demanding that flight attendants remove what she saw as the problem. The problem was Kayla and Kira Johnson, 8-year-old identical twin sisters who sat in their assigned first-class seats wearing matching yellow sundresses their grandmother had bought them specifically for this trip. Their hair braided in intricate patterns their mother had spent 3 hours creating the night before. Each braid ending in a small gold bead that caught the cabin lights when they moved their heads. The twins had been excited beyond measure about this flight. It was their first time flying alone. Well, not truly alone since they had each other, but without their parents to visit their grandfather in Miami for his 70th birthday celebration. Their mother, Dr. Patricia Johnson, a pediatric surgeon at Johns Hopkins, had walked them to the gate, given them each a carry-on bag with snacks, coloring books, and strict instructions to be polite, to mind their manners, and to remember that they represented not just themselves, but their family. They had boarded early as unaccompanied minors do, settling into their first-class seats with barely contained excitement. Their father's company had paid for the upgrade. He was a senior partner at a technology firm and had insisted his daughters travel in comfort for their first solo flight. They'd been model passengers from the moment they'd stepped onto the plane, thanking the flight attendant who helped them with their bags, carefully stowing their backpacks under the seats in front of them, buckling their seatbelts without being asked. For 20 minutes, they'd sat quietly coloring in their books and occasionally whispering to each other about what they'd do first when they got to Grandpa's house. Would they go to the beach immediately, or would they have to wait until tomorrow? Would he make his famous pancakes for breakfast? Had he really built them a treehouse in his backyard, like he'd promised? Their innocent excitement had been shattered the moment Eleanor Briggs reached row 4 and saw who would be sitting beside her. Absolutely not, Eleanor had said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. This is first class. These children shouldn't even be on this plane unaccompanied, let alone sitting here. Where are their parents? Why aren't they in the economy where they belong? The words "where they belong" carried a weight that every black person in America recognized. A coded language that had been used for generations to keep people in prescribed places to maintain boundaries that had nothing to do with tickets or seats and everything to do with skin color. Kayla, sitting in seat 4A by the window, had looked up from her coloring book with confusion. In her 8-year-old mind, she tried to process what was happening. They had tickets. Mommy had shown them the tickets on her phone. Their seat numbers matched the numbers above their heads. So why was this lady so angry? Kira, in seat 4B, the middle seat, reached for her sister's hand instinctively. They'd learned early, too early, that sometimes holding hands made scary things less scary. And this lady with the angry face and the loud voice was definitely scary. Ma'am, these young ladies are properly ticketed passengers. said Jennifer Martinez, the lead flight attendant for first class, approaching with the practiced calm of someone who'd dealt with difficult passengers before, though perhaps never quite like this. Their seats are 4A and 4B. Your seat is 4C. Is there a problem with your seat assignment? The problem, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with indignation, is that I paid $4,000 for a first-class ticket and I expect a certain level of quality in my traveling companions. I don't expect to be seated next to unaccompanied children, especially not these children. The pause before these children was deliberate, meaningful, and understood by everyone listening. Several passengers had already pulled out their phones, sensing that something significant was happening. In row 3, Jeffrey Washington, a civil rights attorney who'd spent his career fighting exactly this kind of discrimination, began recording immediately. "Did we do something wrong?" Kayla whispered to her sister, her voice so small it barely carried beyond their seats. "Maybe we were too loud." "We weren't loud," Kira whispered back, but doubt crept into her voice. Were we? They hadn't been loud. They hadn't been anything but two excited little girls flying to see their grandfather, carrying themselves with the dignity and poise their parents had taught them. But Eleanor Briggs didn't care about their behavior. She cared about their skin color, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "I demand to be reseated," Eleanor announced. "Put me in a different row, or better yet, move them. Surely unaccompanied minors belong in economy class, where they can be properly supervised. First class is for adults, for people who have earned the privilege of sitting here. The assumption that two black children couldn't have earned first-class seats, that they must be some kind of mistake or charity case, hung in the air like a toxic cloud." Other passengers began to react. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That particular discomfort of witnessing naked racism and not knowing whether to intervene. Others were already typing furiously on their phones, posting to social media about what they were witnessing. An elderly black woman in seat 2A, Dorothy Campbell, who'd lived through the civil rights era and thought she'd seen the worst of American racism, stood up slowly. "Those babies have every right to be here," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd fought these battles before. "And you know it." Eleanor turned on her. "This doesn't concern you. This is between me and the airline. When you attack children for the color of their skin, it concerns all of us," Dorothy replied. The flight attendant, Jennifer, tried to de-escalate. "Ma'am, please take your seat. These young ladies are ticketed passengers, and their seats are confirmed." "If you're uncomfortable, I'm not just uncomfortable," Eleanor interrupted. "I'm appalled. What kind of airline allows this? What kind of parents send 8-year-old children unaccompanied in first class? I'll tell you what kind. The kind trying to make some sort of statement, trying to push their children into spaces where they don't belong." There it was, again, where they don't belong. The phrase that had been used to keep black Americans out of schools, neighborhoods, restaurants, and yes, airplane seats for generations. Kayla and Kira had shrunk into their seats, trying to make themselves smaller, invisible. Kayla had closed her coloring book as if somehow the act of coloring had been what made the angry lady upset. Kyra had tucked her hands under her legs, sitting on them, as if their visibility was the problem. Mommy said, "We belong anywhere we want," Kayla whispered to her sister, but it came out as a question, more than a statement, her confidence shaken by the vehemence of Eleanor's rejection. The cabin had become completely silent, except for Eleanor's continued complaints and the soft crying that had started from one of the twins. Kyra, the more sensitive of the two, had begun to cry, silently, tears rolling down her cheeks as she tried to understand why this stranger hated them so much. This shocking discrimination against innocent children is just beginning. Subscribe right now to witness how justice unfolds at 30,000 Ft. What would you do if you witnessed someone refusing to sit next to children because of their race? Would you speak up immediately or document it? Share your thoughts in the comments. The tension in the first-class cabin had reached a breaking point when the cockpit door opened with a deliberate click that somehow managed to cut through Eleanor Briggs's ongoing tirade about standards and appropriate placement and people knowing their place. Captain Daniel Rogers emerged, and his presence immediately changed the dynamic of the confrontation, though perhaps not in the way Eleanor expected. Captain Rogers was 43 years old, stood 6'2" in tall, and carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, flying Apache helicopters before transitioning to commercial aviation. He had salt and pepper hair cut in a military style that had never quite grown out to full civilian-length eyes, that had seen enough of the world to be surprised by very little, and hands that had remained steady through combat missions and emergency landings alike. But nothing in his military service or 15 years of commercial flying had quite prepared him for the scene in his first-class cabin. He'd been monitoring the situation from the cockpit, listening to Jennifer's increasingly frustrated attempts to manage Eleanor through the intercom. His co-pilot first officer, Maria Santos, had pulled up the passenger manifest, confirming what they already knew. Kayla and Kira Johnson, 8 years old, unaccompanied minors, fully paid first-class ticket seats 4A and 4B. Everything is in order. Everything except Eleanor Briggs's racism. What seems to be the problem here, Captain Rogers asked, though he knew exactly what the problem was. He'd heard enough through the intercom, and one look at the scene. 2 small black girls huddled together in tears, while a white woman stood over them ranting told him everything he needed to know. Eleanor immediately redirected her anger toward him, apparently seeing in his white male authority figure presence an ally who would surely understand her position. "Captain, thank goodness you're here. There's been a terrible mistake. These children have been seated in first class next to me, and I'm simply not comfortable with this arrangement." Captain Rogers looked at the twins taking in their terror, their tears, their identical yellow sundresses that reminded him of his own daughter's favorite outfits. He saw the way they held each other's hands, like life preservers in a storm. He saw the coloring books they'd closed and pushed away, as if their childhood joy was something to be ashamed of. "I see 2 young ladies sitting in their assigned seats," he said carefully. "What exactly is the problem?" Eleanor's face wrined. "The problem is that they're 8 years old. They're unaccompanied. They're—" She stopped herself, but everyone knew what word had almost come next. "They're what?" Captain Rogers prompted, his voice dangerously calm. "They're disruptive," Eleanor finished lamely. "Have they been disruptive?" the captain asked Jennifer. "Not at all, Captain. They've been perfect passengers. They boarded early, put away their belongings properly, and have been quietly coloring since they sat down." "Then I'm not seeing a problem," Captain Rogers said. Eleanor's composure cracked. "The problem is that I shouldn't have to sit next to them. I paid for the first class. I have rights." "You do have rights," Captain Rogers agreed. "You have the right to the seat you purchased, which is 4C. You have the right to reasonable comfort and safety. You have the right to courteous service. What you don't have is the right to demand that other passengers be removed because of their age, their race, or any other characteristic." The word race hung in the air like an accusation. Eleanor spluttered. "I never said anything about race. This is about children being in first class, unaccompanied." From row 5. A passenger called out, "We all heard you say they don't belong here. We know what you meant." More voices joined in agreement. The cabin was turning against Eleanor, but she seemed incapable of backing down. Captain Rogers walked closer to the twins, then did something that would be captured on 12 different phone cameras and viewed millions of times within hours. He knelt down in the aisle so he was at eye level with Kayla and Kira. "Hi there," he said gently. "I'm Captain Rogers. I'll be flying the plane today." "What are your names, Kayla?" whispered one twin. Kira whispered the other. "Kayla and Kara, those are beautiful names, and those are beautiful dresses. Are you flying to see someone special?" Kayla nodded, finding her voice slightly. "Our grandpa, it's his birthday. He's turning 70. 70. That's a big birthday. I bet he's excited to see you," Kira added. "He built us a treehouse. He sent pictures." Captain Rogers smiled. "A treehouse? That sounds amazing. You know what, I think your grandpa is very lucky to have granddaughters who travel all by themselves to see him. That takes courage." He stood up and faced the cabin, his voice now carrying to every passenger. These young ladies are exactly where they belong. They are valued passengers on this aircraft, and they will be treated with the same respect and dignity as everyone else." Eleanor's face contorted. "This is ridiculous. You're taking their side because they're passengers on my aircraft." Captain Rogers interrupted. "And on my aircraft, everyone is welcome. Everyone belongs, and anyone who can't accept that is welcome to find alternative transportation." The threat was clear. The cabin held its breath. Eleanor tried a different tactic. "Fine, then move me. Put me in another seat. Ma'am, this is a full flight. The only available seats are in economy middle seats in the back of the aircraft." "Then put them in the economy," Eleanor demanded. Captain Rogers's jaw tightened. "Let me be very clear, Miss Briggs. These children will not be moved. They have done nothing wrong. They are sitting in seats their family purchased. If you have a problem sitting next to them, the problem is yours to solve." "This is discrimination," Eleanor shrieked. Someone in the back of the first class actually laughed. "Lady, you refusing to sit next to black children is discrimination. The captain treating you like everyone else is justice." The twins were still holding hands, but something had shifted. Kayla was sitting up straighter. Kyra had stopped crying. The captain's words, "exactly where they belong," seemed to have given them something to hold on to besides each other. Captain Rogers made his decision. "Miss Briggs, I'm going to give you two options. Option 1, you take your seat for C and we continue to Miami without further incident. You don't have to speak to anyone. You don't have to interact. You simply have to sit in your assigned seat and behave like the adult you claim to be." "And option 2?" Eleanor asked defiantly. "Option 2 is you deplane immediately, forfeit your ticket, and find your own way to Miami. Atlas Airways will ban you from all future flights, and the video evidence of your discrimination against minor children will be forwarded to appropriate authorities. The captain has drawn the line. Subscribe immediately to see if Eleanor backs down or doubles down on discrimination." Do you think the captain should have given Eleanor any options, or should she have been removed immediately? What would justice look like here? Comment below. The first-class cabin of Flight 473 had become an arena where two worldviews collided. Eleanor Briggs's belief that certain people belonged in certain places based on nothing more than skin color, and Captain Daniel Rogers's conviction that his aircraft was a space where dignity was non-negotiable. Between them, literally and figuratively, sat Kayla and Kyra Johnson, 8 years old, suddenly thrust into the center of a battle they shouldn't have had to fight. Eleanor Briggs stood in the aisle, her face cycling through emotions, indignation, disbelief, rage, as she processed the captain's ultimatum. The idea that she, Eleanor Briggs, who'd flown first class for 30 years, who belonged to country clubs and served on charity boards, carefully selected charities of course, would be given an ultimatum by anyone, much less in defense of two black children, was incomprehensible to her. "You're seriously taking their side?" she asked, her voice dripping with incredulity. "I'm taking the side of what's right," Captain Rogers replied evenly. "And what's right is that every passenger who has a ticket for a seat gets to sit in that seat without harassment." "Harassment? I'm being harassed. I'm being forced to sit next to children." Captain Rogers finished for her. "You're being asked to sit next to children. Two little girls who were coloring quietly until you started this scene." From the back of first class, a man's voice called out, "Just sit down, lady. We all want to get to Miami." But Eleanor was beyond reason. Years of unchecked privilege, of having her prejudices accommodated, of living in carefully curated spaces where she never had to confront the ugliness of her beliefs, had led to this moment where she simply couldn't comprehend not getting her way. "I want to speak to your supervisor," she demanded. Captain Rogers almost smiled. "Ma'am, at $30,000 FT, I am the supervisor. This is my aircraft, and my decision is final. Then I want a refund. Full refund. This is not what I paid for. What you paid for was seat 4C on a flight from Chicago to Miami. That's exactly what you're getting. What you didn't pay for was the right to traumatize children or create a hostile environment for other passengers." Kayla, emboldened by the captain's defense, found her voice. "We didn't do anything wrong," she said, her small voice carrying surprising strength. "Mommy said we could sit here. She showed us the tickets." Eleanor turned on her. "Your mother, stop." Captain Rogers's voice was sharp now. Command authority in full effect. "You will not address these children again. If you have something to say, you say it to me." The cabin erupted in applause. Someone shouted, "Protect those babies, Captain." Eleanor's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is reverse discrimination. I'm being persecuted for being racist," offered Dorothy Campbell from seat 2A. "Yes, dear. That's exactly what's happening. You're facing consequences for your racism. I know it must be a new experience for you." The laughter that rippled through the cabin seemed to push Eleanor over the edge. "How dare you? I'm not racist. I have black friends." The cabin collectively groaned at the classic defense. Jeffrey Washington, the civil rights attorney who'd been recording everything, called out, "Having black friends doesn't give you a free pass to discriminate against black children. In fact, I feel sorry for your friends." Kira, the twin who'd been crying, suddenly spoke up. "Why don't you like us? We don't even know you." The innocent question delivered in a child's voice still thick with tears seemed to momentarily stun Eleanor. For just a second, her face showed something that might have been shameful. But it passed quickly, replaced by defensive anger. It's not about liking or not liking. It's about appropriate placement. Children shouldn't be in first class unaccompanied. "But there are two of us," Kayla pointed out with 8-year-old logic. "So we're not unaccompanied. We're accompanying each other." Several passengers chuckled at the child's reasoning, which was both adorable and accurate. Captain Rogers decided to end this. "Ms. Briggs, you have 60 seconds to make your decision. Sit down or leave. Those are your only options." Eleanor looked around the cabin, searching for allies for someone who would take her side. But she found only condemnation in the faces looking back at her. Some angry, some disgusted. Many recording her meltdown for posterity. "This will be on the news," she threatened. "I'll call every media outlet. I'll tell them how Atlas Airways discriminated against a paying customer." "Please do," Captain Rogers said calmly. "I'm sure they'll be very interested in the story of a grown woman who refused to sit next to 8-year-old girls because they're black. In fact," he pulled out his phone, "let me make sure we have all the evidence properly documented." He took a photo of the scene. Eleanor standing in the aisle, face contorted with rage, while two small girls in yellow dresses huddled together in their seats. "For the record," he announced to the cabin, "I'm documenting that Miss Eleanor Briggs is refusing to take her assigned seat because she objects to sitting next to Kayla and Kira Johnson, aged 8, because of their race." "Is that accurate, Miss Briggs?" "That's not, I never said. You said they don't belong here. You said these children with clear emphasis. You demanded they be moved to economy. Everyone here heard you. It's all on video. So I ask again, are you refusing to sit next to these children because they're black?" Eleanor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She couldn't say yes without admitting to racism. She couldn't say no without looking foolish because everyone knew the truth. "I'm refusing to sit next to unaccompanied minors," she finally said weakly. "Then I have good news." Captain Rogers said, "They're not unaccompanied. I'm personally taking responsibility for them. I'll be checking on them throughout the flight. So they're now accompanied by the captain of this aircraft. Does that solve your problem?" The trap was perfect. Eleanor couldn't object to the captain accompanying the children without revealing that her issue was never about them being unaccompanied. The confrontation reaches its climax. Subscribe now to see Eleanor's final choice and its consequences. Should businesses like airlines have the right to remove customers who discriminate against other passengers? Where's the line between customer service and enabling racism? Comment your thoughts. The 60-second countdown. Captain Rogers had given Eleanor Briggs was ticking away, and every passenger in first class seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see if this woman would actually choose to die on the hill of her own prejudice. The twins Kayla and Kira had stopped cowering and were now watching with the kind of fascination children show when adults behave more childishly than they ever would. 30 seconds, Captain Rogers announced his voice, carrying the calm authority of someone who'd counted down to far more consequential moments in Apache helicopters over Afghanistan. Eleanor's hands were shaking now, whether from rage or the dawning realization that she'd backed herself into an impossible corner. She looked at the exit door, then at her seat, then at the twins, her face a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. The painful conflict between her deep-seated prejudices and her desire to get to Miami for her business meeting. "This is extortion," she declared. "You're forcing me to." "I'm forcing nothing," Captain Rogers interrupted. "You have complete freedom of choice. Sit or leave. 20 seconds. That's when something unexpected happened. Kira, the more sensitive twin who'd been crying earlier, unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up on her seat. Her sister tried to pull her back down, but Kyra had something to say. "Lady," she said, her 8-year-old voice clear and strong. "My mommy's a doctor. She saves sick children. My daddy makes computers talk to each other so people can work. They're really smart and really good, and they bought us these tickets because they love us. You don't have to like us, but you can't make us leave. We belong here because our parents said we do, and they don't lie." The cabin erupted. The applause was thunderous. Someone shouted, "Tell her baby." Another voice, "That child has more class in her pinky finger than that woman has in her whole body." Kayla stood up too emboldened by her sister's courage. "And our grandpa was in the army. He fought for this country. He has medals." He said, "America means everyone gets to be equal, even in airplane seats." The twins' simple truth, their innocent invocation of their family's contributions and their inherent worth, seemed to strip away all of Eleanor's pretenses. She stood there exposed as exactly what she was, a racist who tried to bully children, and found herself facing not just the captain's authority, but the moral authority of 8-year-olds who understood justice better than she did. 10 seconds, Captain Rogers said. Eleanor made one last desperate play. "I'll sue. I'll sue the airline. I'll sue you personally. This is America. I have rights. You absolutely do," agreed Jeffrey Washington, the civil rights attorney in row 3. "And when you file that lawsuit, I'll personally represent these children pro bono in their countersuit for discrimination, emotional distress, and violation of their civil rights. Would you like my card now, or should I wait until we land 5 seconds?" Eleanor grabbed her carry-on from the overhead bin with such force that she nearly hit another passenger. "This is not over," she hissed. "You're right," Captain Rogers said. "It's not over. Atlas Airways will be pursuing a lifetime ban, and this incident will be reported to federal authorities." 3 seconds. With a strangled cry of rage, Eleanor Briggs stormed toward the exit, her designer heels clicking against the floor like a countdown to her own destruction. But as she passed row 2, Dorothy Campbell stood up, blocking her path for just a moment. "Honey," Dorothy said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of dealing with Eleanor Briggs. "Those babies you just tried to humiliate, they're going to remember this day. But not the way you think. They're going to remember the day a whole airplane full of people stood up for them. The day a pilot chose justice over customer comfort. The day they learned that belonging isn't something someone like you can grant or take away. It's something they carry inside themselves." Eleanor pushed past her, but Dorothy's words followed her off the plane. As Eleanor reached the door, Jennifer, the flight attendant, was waiting with security. 2 uniformed officers stood ready to escort her off the jet bridge and out of the secure area of the airport. "Your luggage will be retrieved and made available at baggage claim," Jennifer informed her with professional calm. "Atlas Airways will process a refund for the unused portion of your ticket minus applicable fees. You are hereby notified that you are banned from all Atlas Airways flights pending a formal review, which, given the video evidence and witness statements, will almost certainly result in a lifetime ban." Eleanor turned for one last look at the cabin, perhaps hoping to see some sign of support, some indication that someone understood her position. Instead, she saw 44 first-class passengers filming her removal. The twins standing on their seats surrounded by supportive passengers, and Captain Rogers watching her with the kind of steady gaze that suggested he'd remember her face forever. "Get these people away from me," she muttered, echoing her initial complaint, but now referring to everyone, the entire plane full of people who'd chosen humanity over hatred. As she disappeared down the jet bridge, the cabin exploded in celebration. Passengers were high-fiving, hugging the twins, shaking Captain Rogers's hand. Someone started a chant of, "Let them fly, let them fly," which morphed into, "They belong, they belong." Captain Rogers knelt down next to the twins again. "Ladies, I need to apologize. You should never have had to experience that. No child should ever be made to feel unwelcome because of who they are." "It's okay," Kayla said, "with the resilience children shouldn't have to have. Mommy told us some people might not like us because we're black. She said to kill them with kindness and call her if we need to. Should we call Mommy Kayest?" Captain Rogers smiled. "How about we call her together once everyone's settled? I'd like to personally assure her that you're safe and welcome on this flight. Eleanor is gone, but the story is far from over. Subscribe to see how this incident transforms into a movement. Do you think the other passengers did enough to support the twins? Or should they have intervened sooner? What's our responsibility as bystanders to discrimination? Share below." With Eleanor Briggs escorted off the aircraft in what would later be dubbed the Walk of Shame, heard round the internet, Flight 473 transformed into something extraordinary. Not just a flight from Chicago to Miami, but a flying testament to what happens when good people stand up to hatred. When authority chooses justice over appeasement, and when two little girls' dignity matters more than one adult's comfort. The door closed with a definitive thunk that seemed to seal Eleanor's fate while opening a new chapter for everyone remaining on board. Captain Rogers stood in the aisle, still in the first-class cabin, and made an announcement that Jennifer, the lead flight attendant, would later say was unprecedented in her 12 years of flying. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what you've witnessed today was unacceptable. 2 young passengers were subjected to discrimination that has no place on this aircraft, in this airline, or in our society. Kayla and Kira Johnson are not just welcome on this flight. They are valued members of our Atlas Airways family." He paused, looking directly at the twins. "Girls, would you like to come see the cockpit before we take off?" The transformation in their faces from hurt to wonder was captured on dozens of phones and would later become one of the most shared images from the incident. Their eyes widened, tears replaced by excitement. "Really, Kyrest? Can we really?" Kayla added. "Absolutely. In fact, if your mom says it's okay when we call her, you can even make the announcement for takeoff." The cabin erupted in applause again. Passengers were openly weeping now. Not from sadness, but from the emotional whiplash of seeing hate transform into love, rejection into acceptance, trauma into triumph. As Captain Rogers led the twins toward the cockpit, passengers began what would later be called the Great Seat Shuffle. Without being asked, without coordination, first-class passengers started moving to create a protective celebratory bubble around seats 4A and 4B. The elderly Dorothy Campbell moved from 2A to 4C, Eleanor's former seat, declaring, "I'll be these baby's seatmate. Been fighting racism for 70 years. Might as well keep them company for 2 more hours." Jeffrey Washington, the civil rights attorney, moved to the row behind them. "I'll be right here if you need anything, girls." A young couple on their honeymoon gave up their seats across the aisle to be closer. The wife saying, "We want our future kids to grow up in a world where this kind of support is normal." By the time the twins returned from the cockpit, wearing pilot wings pinned to their yellow dresses and carrying signed pictures from Captain Rogers and First Officer Santos, their section of first class had become a cocoon of protection and support. Captain Rogers helped them into their seats and then pulled out his phone. "Now let's call your mom." He put it on speaker, and when Dr. Patricia Johnson answered, her voice tight with the anxiety of a parent whose children are flying alone, the entire first-class cabin could hear the conversation. "Dr. Johnson, this is Captain Daniel Rogers of Flight 473. I'm here with Kayla and Kyra. Are they okay?" The gate agent said there was some kind of delay. "Mommy?" Both girls shouted in unison. "Oh, my babies, are you all right?" Captain Rogers took control. "Doctor, Johnson, I need to inform you of an incident that occurred. A passenger refused to sit next to your daughters because of their race. That passenger has been removed from the flight and banned from our airline. Your daughters handled themselves with remarkable grace and dignity. There was silence on the other end. The kind of silence that every black parent knows. The processing of another moment when their children faced the racism they'd hoped to shield them from just a little longer. Were they scared? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. We were a little scared, Kayla admitted. But the captain stood up for us, and so did lots of people. Everyone stood up for us, Mommy, Kira added. The whole airplane. Dr. Johnson was crying. Now they could all hear it. Captain Rogers, yes, ma'am, thank you. Thank you for protecting my babies. Dr. Johnson, it was an honor. Your daughters are remarkable young ladies. They stood up for themselves with courage that adults rarely show. You've raised them well. Can I speak to them privately for a moment? Captain Rogers handed the phone to the girls and stepped back. But in the quiet cabin, everyone could hear Dr. Johnson's words. Kayla Kay, listen to Mommy. What happened today was wrong, and I'm so sorry you had to face it. But you remember what we always say. We belong everywhere. The twins recited in unison. That's right. You belong everywhere. In first class, in classrooms, in boardrooms, wherever your dreams take you. Don't let anyone ever make you feel otherwise. We won't, Mommy Kayla said. The captain says we're junior pilots now, Kyra added excitedly. After the call ended, the flight took on a festive atmosphere. Passengers were taking selfies with the twins. Flight attendants were bringing them special treats from the galley. And someone had started a collection, not of money, but of business cards and contact information. If you girls ever want to visit NASA, call me, said a woman who turned out to be an aerospace engineer. I run a summer camp for young leaders, another passenger offered. Full scholarships for both of you anytime. I'm a publisher, said another. If you want to write a book about this experience, I'll publish it. The twins, overwhelmed, but delighted, accepted each card with the politeness their parents had taught them, carefully placing them in their backpacks. As the flight continued toward Miami, the plane itself seemed lighter, as if the weight of Eleanor's hatred had been literally lifted from it. The pilot made periodic announcements, updating passengers on their progress, but also checking in on our special junior pilots Kayla and Kira as they began their descent into Miami. Captain Rogers made one final announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for landing, I want to thank you all for standing up for what's right today. You've shown these young ladies that they have an entire plane full of supporters. But I also want to remind everyone that what happened today happens every day in smaller ways to people who don't have a plane full of witnesses. Let's all commit to standing up against discrimination wherever we see it, whether at 30,000 FT or on the ground. The landing in Miami was smooth, but the real landing back into a world where discrimination still existed would be more turbulent. As the plane taxied to the gate, passengers began preparing something special. They'd coordinated through whispers and hand signals to create an honor guard of sorts for the twins to walk through as they deplaned. The flight is landing, but the impact is just beginning. Subscribe to see the powerful aftermath of this viral incident. How can we translate the support shown on this flight into everyday action against discrimination? What concrete steps can we all take? Comment your ideas. The images hit social media before Flight 473 even reached the gate in Miami. 44 first-class passengers had recorded various parts of Eleanor Briggs's racist meltdown, the captain's intervention, and the twins' courage. Within an hour, Judge Justice at 30,000 FT and Darius Kalan Cairo were trending globally. The story of Flight 473 didn't end when the plane touched down in Miami. Nor did it conclude with Eleanor Briggs's public downfall or the twins' momentary fame. Like ripples in a pond, the impact of that day spread outward in ways no one could have predicted, touching lives, changing policies, and reshaping how America talked about belonging, dignity, and the courage of children. The Johnson family's kitchen table in Baltimore had become command central for something they'd never expected: a movement. Dr. Patricia Johnson, sat surrounded by letters, thousands of them, from parents whose children had faced discrimination, from adults who'd been told they didn't belong, from flight attendants who'd witnessed similar incidents but hadn't known how to respond. "Mommy, another box came today," Kayla announced, dragging a package from the front door. Inside were more letters, but also something else. Yellow dresses, dozens of them. Parents were sending photos of their daughters wearing yellow dresses in solidarity, calling it Yellow Dress Friday, at schools across the country. What had started as the twins' outfit choice had become a symbol of resistance against discrimination. Kira held up one letter, reading aloud in her 8-year-old voice. "Dear Kayla and Kira, I'm 65 years old, and when I was your age, I wasn't allowed to swim in the public pool because I was black. Seeing you stand up on that airplane reminded me that we've come far. But seeing that woman try to remove you reminded me we have far to go. You are my heroes." Dr. Johnson wiped her eyes. Her husband, Marcus Johnson, a software engineer who'd been quietly building a website to coordinate responses to all the correspondence, looked up from his laptop. "The Yellow Dress Foundation website has gotten 3 million unique visitors," he announced. "We've raised enough to provide legal support for 40 families facing travel discrimination." But it wasn't just about the money or the website. It was about the conversations happening in living rooms across America, where parents were using Kayla and Kira's story to talk to their children about racism, about standing up for others, about belonging. The United States House Subcommittee on Aviation had called a special hearing on discrimination in air travel. The star witnesses were 2 8- and 1 2-year-old girls in yellow dresses sitting at a table that had been specially lowered to accommodate their height. "State your names for the record," the committee chair requested gently. Kayla Michelle Johnson said one twin clearly into the microphone. Kyra Marie Johnson said the other. The gallery was packed. Captain Rogers was there in his dress uniform. Dorothy Campbell had flown in from Chicago. Marcus Washington had helped prepare the family's testimony. Even some passengers from Flight 473 who'd remained silent initially had come wanting to witness this moment. Representative Sarah Martinez herself, a Latina, who'd faced discrimination, asked the first question. "Girls, can you tell us in your own words what happened on that airplane?" Kayla took a deep breath. "A lady didn't want to sit next to us because we're black. She said we didn't belong in first class. She tried to make us move," Kira added. "She made us feel like we did something wrong, but we were just coloring in our books. And how did that make you feel?" Sad Kayla said, simply and confused. "We didn't understand why she hated us when she didn't even know us." An elderly congressman who'd initially been skeptical about having children testify was visibly moved. "What do you think should happen to make sure this doesn't happen to other children?" Kyra had clearly thought about this. "There should be rules that say you can't be mean to people because of how they look. And if you break the rules, you can't fly anymore, and people should help." Kayla added, "When someone is being mean, other people should say, 'Stop,' like Captain Rogers did, like Miss Dorothy did." The committee would go on to pass the Passenger Dignity Act, making it a federal offense to discriminate against passengers based on race, age, religion, or nationality, with specific provisions protecting unaccompanied minors. Atlas Airways had turned the anniversary of Flight 473 into an annual event. This year's flight was free for any family who'd experienced discrimination while traveling. The plane was full of children of every race, all wearing yellow dresses, shirts, bow ties, ribbons. Captain Rogers, now chief pilot, made the announcement as they prepared for takeoff. 1 year ago, 2 brave young ladies taught us all a lesson about dignity. Today, we fly with dozens of brave young people, all of whom deserve to fly without fear, without harassment, without anyone telling them they don't belong. Eleanor Briggs, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale studied in business schools and sociology classes. Her real estate license had been revoked after investigation revealed a pattern of racial steering directing black families away from certain neighborhoods. She'd attempted to rehabilitate her image by claiming she'd been misunderstood, that she was concerned about the children's safety, not their race. But the video evidence was too clear, her words too explicit. She'd moved 3 times in the year since the incident, each time discovered by neighbours who'd Googled her name. Her last known residence was a small apartment in rural Nebraska, where she worked remotely as a data entry clerk under her maiden name, Eleanor Patterson. She'd aged visibly the weight of public shame, etching lines on her face that hadn't been there before. In a moment of desperation, she'd written a letter to the Johnson family. "Dear Dr. and Mr. Johnson, I know I have no right to contact you. What I did to your daughters was unforgivable. I've lost everything. My career, my reputation, my community, and I deserve all of it. But I need you to know that your daughter's courage in the face of my cruelty has haunted me every day since. I see their faces when I close my eyes. I hear their small voices asking why I didn't like them. I was raised to believe that certain people belonged in certain places. I never questioned it, never examined it, never considered the human cost of those beliefs. Your daughters forced me to see myself clearly for the first time, and what I saw was ugly. I don't ask for forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I'm in therapy trying to understand how I became someone capable of trying to harm children. I'm volunteering with a literacy program for underprivileged kids, trying to do some good to balance the harm I've caused. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's all I can do." Eleanor Briggs. The Johnson family debated whether to respond. Finally, Dr. Johnson wrote back, "Miss Briggs, we received your letter. While we appreciate your acknowledgement of the harm you caused, you need to understand that your actions were part of a larger system of discrimination that our daughters will face throughout their lives. You were just the most visible, most viral example. Our daughters are healing, but they've lost some of their innocence. They now look at strangers with weariness they didn't have before. They ask us before getting excited about trips whether someone might try to make them leave. You did that to them. Your volunteer work is a start, but real change requires more than individual redemption. It requires dismantling the systems and beliefs that made you feel comfortable demanding 2 children be removed from airplane seats. We hope you're working on that too. We don't forgive you. That's not ours to give. That belongs to Kayla and Kira when they're old enough to understand the full weight of what you tried to do to them. But we acknowledge your letter and your efforts to change the Johnson family." Netflix released Yellow Dresses at 30,000 FT, a documentary about Flight 473 and its aftermath. The filmmakers had interviewed everyone the twins, now 10 and more articulate about their experience. Captain Rogers, Dorothy Campbell, even Eleanor Briggs, whose face was blurred at her request, though her voice was clear. The most powerful moment came when the documentarians reunited all the passengers from first class who'd stood up for the twins. 42 people gathered in an airplane hangar surrounded by the shells of aircraft being built. "We all think we'd be heroes," Marcus Washington said to the camera. "We all think we'd stand up immediately when we see injustice. But the truth is, most of us hesitated. We waited to see if someone else would act first. Those crucial seconds when Eleanor was berating those babies, and we all just watched. I'll regret those seconds forever." A woman who hadn't spoken up initially added, "I was afraid of confrontation. I was afraid of being seen as aggressive, but my silence was complicity. Those little girls needed voices, and I kept mine quiet. Never again." The documentary won 3 Emmys and was shown in schools across the country. It became required viewing for all Atlas Airways employees and was licensed by dozens of other airlines for their training programs. The twins, now 11, published a children's book called We Belong Everywhere. They'd written it themselves with illustrations by a black artist who'd reached out after seeing their story. The book told their story in simple terms, but more importantly, it told the stories of other children who'd been told they didn't belong in gifted programs on sports teams, in advanced classes, and had proven otherwise. At their book launch in Baltimore, hundreds of people came, many wearing yellow. Captain Rogers flew in specially for the event. Dorothy Campbell, now 81, insisted on introducing them. "These children," she said, her voice still strong, "did more for civil rights in one flight than many of us do in a lifetime. They showed us that courage doesn't wait for adulthood. It shows up whenever injustice appears, even if you're only 8 years old." The twins read from their book. their voices confident, now shaped by 3 years of telling their story, of meeting other children who'd faced discrimination, of understanding their place in a larger narrative. The lady on the plane thought we didn't belong in our seats, Kira read. But belonging isn't about seats. It's about knowing who you are and not letting anyone make you forget it. Kayla and Kyra entered high school at 13, having skipped a grade due to their academic excellence. On their first day, wearing yellow ribbons in their hair, they'd long outgrown the dresses. They were recognized by their principal. "You're the Flight 473 twins," she said with a smile. That incident inspired our zero-tolerance policy on discrimination. "You've already changed this school before even attending it." But the twins were tired of being symbols. They wanted to be teenagers to worry about algebra tests and school dances, not discrimination and viral fame. Yet they couldn't escape the responsibility that came with their experience. When a Latino student was told by a teacher that people like him weren't cut out for AP courses, Kayla and Cairo were the first to stand up to report it to organize other students in support. They'd learned that privilege, even accidental privilege from viral fame, came with responsibility. "We don't want to be famous for being discriminated against." Kayla told a reporter who tracked them down for a 5-year retrospective. "We want to be famous for what we accomplish. But if our story helps one kid know they belong wherever they want to be, then it was worth it." Captain Daniel Rogers, retiring after 40 years of combined military and civilian aviation service, made an announcement that surprised everyone. He'd quietly been saving and investing. And with matching funds from Atlas Airways and private donors inspired by the story, he established the Kayla and Kira Johnson Scholarship for Courageous Youth. The scholarship would provide full college tuition for young people who'd stood up against discrimination, whether as victims or allies. The first recipient was a white teenager from Mississippi who'd been ostracized by his community for organizing a protest against his school's discriminatory dress code that targeted black students' hairstyles. At the scholarship announcement, Captain Rogers, his hair now fully grey, stood with the teenage twins who towered over their 8-year-old selves, but still had the same bright smiles. "These young ladies taught me something," he said. "They taught me that neutrality in the face of injustice is complicity." Every day I'd flown before that day. I'd maintained order, followed procedures, avoided confrontation. But when I saw those 2 little girls being bullied by an adult, I realized that sometimes keeping the peace means allowing pieces of people's dignity to be torn away. Never again. On the 10th anniversary of Flight 473 Atlas Airways did something unprecedented. They recreated the flight with as many of the original passengers as they could find. But this time, they filled the rest of the plane with young activists, all teenagers and young adults who'd fought discrimination in their communities. Kayla and Kara, now 18, and headed to college. Yale for Kayla, studying law. Embry-Riddle for Kara, studying aeronautical engineering, sat in the same seats 4A and 4B. The seat 4C, Eleanor's former seat, remained empty for the entire flight. A yellow dress was draped over it with a placard that read, "This seat represents every person who chose hatred over humanity. May it remain empty, and may their hatred never fly again." Dorothy Campbell had passed away 2 years prior, but her granddaughters sat in her seat wearing Dorothy's vintage yellow dress from the 1960s. Marcus Washington, now a federal judge, was there. The couple who'd been on their honeymoon now had 2 children with them. The businessman who'd finally spoken up had become a diversity consultant, using the story of his initial silence as a teaching tool. But the most surprising attendee was Eleanor Briggs. She hadn't been invited. She'd bought a ticket in economy, the only thing she could afford under her maiden name. She sat in the very last row, wearing dark glasses and a hat, hoping not to be recognized. But Kayla recognized her during the pre-flight walkthrough. The captain always did. The teenager stopped, stared, and then did something no one expected. She walked back to Eleanor's seat. "Ms. Briggs," she said quietly, "I know who you are." Eleanor seemed to shrink into her seat. I'm sorry. Believe I shouldn't have come." "No," Kayla said. "You should be here. You're part of this story." "I'm the villain of this story," Eleanor whispered. "Villains can change. Kayla said. That's what redemption means. Did you change? Eleanor pulled off her sunglasses, revealing eyes red from crying. Tried God, I tried. I volunteer teaching English to immigrant children. I've spoken at diversity workshops about my mistakes. I've spent 10 years trying to undo the harm I caused in 10 minutes. Kira had joined them, along with Captain Rogers. The cabin was watching recording, waiting. Do you remember what you said to us? Kai asked. Every word, Eleanor admitted. Every horrible word. They echo in my head every day. You said we didn't belong in first class. Kayla said, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Yes, you were. Kyra agreed. But here's the thing. If we can belong in first class, then you can belong in economy. Because belonging isn't about the seat. It's about recognizing everyone's humanity, even yours, even after what you did. Captain Rogers added, Miss Briggs, you've served your time in the court of public opinion. What matters now is what you do with the rest of your life. Then Eleanor broke down completely. I've written you letters every year. I never sent them. I didn't have the right. Send them, Kayla said. Well, read them when we're ready. But for now, fly to Miami. See your family. Live your life, but live it better. As the twins walked back to their seats, the plane was silent except for Eleanor's quiet sobs. But they weren't just tears of shame anymore. They were tears of something else. Not quite redemption, not quite forgiveness, but possibility. The flight took off smoothly. Captain Rogers made his announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, 10 years ago, this flight became a classroom where we all learned about courage, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right. Today, we fly not just from Chicago to Miami, but from our past toward a better future. The story of Flight 473 became more than just a viral moment. It became a teaching tool, a rallying cry, a reminder. Universities created case studies around it. The Smithsonian acquired not just the yellow dresses, but also Captain Rogers's wings, Dorothy Campbell's purse, and even Eleanor Briggs's letter of apology, creating a complete exhibit on how discrimination operates and how it can be fought. Kayla Johnson became a civil rights attorney, eventually arguing a case before the Supreme Court about discrimination in public accommodations. She won with the decision, citing her own experience as evidence of ongoing civil rights violations. Kira Johnson became a commercial pilot, then an astronaut. When she flew her first mission to the International Space Station, she brought a tiny yellow dress with her a doll-sized version that floated in zero gravity, proving that there really were no limits to where she belonged. Captain Rogers lived to see both twins achieve their dreams. On his deathbed, at 91, surrounded by pilots he'd mentored, he kept repeating, "Those little girls in yellow dresses, they changed everything." Eleanor Briggs lived quietly, teaching, volunteering, never escaping her past, but no longer running from it. When she died at 78, her obituary mentioned Flight 473, but it also mentioned the hundreds of immigrant children she'd taught, the dozens of speeches she'd given about the dangers of prejudice, the letters of apology she'd written every year to the Johnson family. Some sent, some not all sincere. The Johnson parents, Dr. Patricia and Marcus, established a museum dedicated to everyday acts of discrimination and resistance. Flight 473 was the centerpiece, but it was surrounded by thousands of other stories. Some ending in triumph, others in tragedy, all demanding that we do better. And in classrooms around America, children learned about the day 2 8-year-old girls in yellow dresses stood their ground at 30,000 FT and proved that courage has no minimum age dignity, has no maximum altitude, and belonging is not a gift to be granted, but a right to be claimed. The final artifact in the museum is a simple sign created by Kayla and Kyra when they were 15 for a school project. It reads, "On Flight 473, we learned, hatred is loud, but love is louder. One person's courage can inspire dozens. Children see clearly what adults complicate. Belonging isn't about where you sit, but about recognizing that everyone deserves a seat. Yellow is the color of sunshine, and sunshine finds its way through every cloud. The sign hangs next to a photo of two little girls in yellow dresses standing tall in first class, surrounded by strangers who became allies in a plane that became a courtroom on a flight that became history. The story of Flight 473 became required reading in aviation training programs, schools, and civil rights courses. It proved that Rosa Parks's legacy lived on, not in buses, but in airplanes. Not through adults, but through children, not through planned protests, but through the simple act of existing while black and refusing to be moved. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with everyone who needs to remember that standing up to discrimination is everyone's responsibility. Whether you're 8 or 80, whether you're the captain or a passenger, what would you tell your children about this story? How do we prepare the next generation to both face discrimination and stand against it? Share your thoughts on raising children in a world that's still fighting for equality.